Now, after removing the cap from the master cylinder, I like to insert a screwdriver between the caliper and the rotor. This allows me to pull the caliper over, checking the slides and collapsing the piston at the same time. Now, on this particular vehicle, there is 2 bolts holding the caliper on. After removing the 2 bolts, you can simply pull the caliper away. Now, I like to take a piece of wire. You can use a bungee cord or whatever you have. I like this piece of wire and tie this caliper somewhere securely to the vehicle. The purpose of this is, if you're working on a vehicle and the caliper would drop, it will not overextend your hose and damage it. So it's just a safety precaution. I am tying this to the spring, but you can secure it to anywhere on the vehicle you wish. That's handy for you. Next, we will be removing the brake pads. And there's my little dog Will coming to supervise. Now, I like to take a screwdriver and go behind the lip on the bearing cap all the way around, and I like to get the bearing cap loose. Then I will put channel locks on the cap and try to remove it. Now, if it does not come freely, use the screwdriver some more. Do not over squeeze on the channel locks or you will damage the cap. Now, there's a cotter pin there. You need to remove this. Depending on how bent up the cotter pin is, you will need to straighten it as much as you can and then pull it up out of the hole. Now, behind the cotter pin is a little cap. It's like a metal retainer that goes over the nut. This keeps the nut from backing off. Now, the next thing you want to do is remove the nut. And this will let you get the bearings out. Now, I'm using channel locks here, but you can use a wrench or a socket, anything you prefer. Now, after removing the nut, you can pull the outer bearing. If you're reusing the bearings, you need to wash them thoroughly and repack them. I have a video up of how to repack the wheel bearings. We will be replacing them with new bearings. Now I will simply pull the rotor off. Now, always use a new grease seal in the back. Here I am installing the new bearing that is already pre-packed. Now, as installing the seal, I am using a hammer. You may want to use something that covers the whole seal and put it down in there with the hammer that way. That way you do not bend the seal. Now, I will be putting the new rotor on, but there's a spindle that sticks out there. Always wipe the old grease off and apply a new film of clean grease. Now I am inserting the new outer bearing that's already been pre-packed. Now there is a washer, a nut, and that little retainer that goes on. You will want to clean these and reinstall. The washer going on first. After you get the washer on, then you can insert the nut. Now also, you will not see in this video, but I like to take a little never seize and put on the lug studs. Now, when you install the nut, what I like to do is I like to preload the bearing, which is tighten the nut up a little tight. Then I like to spin the rotor. After I spin the rotor, you will see me back the nut off and then put some more torque on it. If you are not familiar with doing this, there will be a torque spec you will be able to find, and you can torque this nut, but I do it by feel. You will notice the rotor looks like it might have a little resistance to turning, but this is because it is very cold out and the grease and everything is very cold and stiff. Now after you get this nut on, you can put that little tin cap back on. If you will notice, it is something like a castle nut. If it does not line up with your cotter pin hole, you can simply pull this off, turn it, and put it back on until you have holes that line up to put your cotter pin in. Now, if at all possible, you should always use a new cotter pin. Now after inserting the cotter pin, you will want to bend it up so that it does not back out. You also want to make sure as you bend this, you get it out of the way of the bearing cap because you do not want it to rub on there. So make sure this is bent around very well and tight to the spindle. Now the next thing we will be doing is installing the bearing cap. Now I put it up there and I tap it on with a hammer. Tap lightly, you do not want to bend this. Now the next thing I do is I take brake cleaner and I clean the rotor thoroughly, inside and out, because they are sprayed with a cosmoline so they do not rust until you have them. Now you want to make sure you get all the cosmoline off, because you do not want this to get on your brake pads. Now, the next step I will be installing the new brake pads. Some brake pads will have an extra little, looks like a piece of sheet metal or something attached to the rear of the pad, the metal part. This is an anti-squill. If it does not have that, you might want to put anti-squill stuff on there. I will be pushing the slides back and then reinserting the caliper. Now this should go freely. If not, you need to look. Now next step is to put the wheels back on. Before you drive the vehicle, you need to use the brake pedal a few times to get your pedal back up, because remember, you have collapsed the piston into the caliper.